The gate slammed in my face, my 3-day-old baby screaming in my arms, my husband, no, my ex-husband, standing there in his $1,000 suit, telling security to make sure the help never came back. He had no idea that 20 minutes ago, I'd become the richest woman in America. Before we get into this story, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because what you're about to hear, you won't believe how this ends. Trust me, you'll want to see karma do her thing. Now let me take you back to where it all started. My name is Camila Rodriguez, and 3 years ago, I was an ICU nurse at Presbyterian Hospital. I loved my job. There was something about saving lives, about being there in someone's darkest moment that made me feel like I had purpose. I worked double shifts, slept in the break room sometimes, and I was good at what I did. Really good. That's where I met Trevor Whitmore. Not as a patient, thank God, but at one of those fancy hospital fundraiser galas. You know the kind, where rich people write checks so they can feel good about themselves while drinking champagne that costs more than my monthly rent. I was only there because my supervisor insisted all the senior nurses attend. I wore a dress I'd bought on sale 3 years prior, and I felt completely out of place. Trevor walked up to me at the bar, 6'2", salt and pepper hair even though he was only 35, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. He had this smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He told me I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. He asked about my work, seemed genuinely interested when I talked about my patients. By the end of the night, I had his number and a flutter in my chest I hadn't felt in years. The next 6 months were like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. Trevor took me to restaurants where I couldn't pronounce half the menu. Weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. He'd send flowers to the hospital with notes that made all the other nurses swoon. He met my parents, my father who worked construction, my mother who cleaned houses, and he was charming, respectful. My mother whispered to me in Spanish that I'd found a good man. There were red flags, of course. There always are. His mother, Constance, looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe the first time we met. His friends at the country club would stop talking when I walked up, then ask me overly polite questions about what it's like being a nurse, in voices that dripped with condescension. Trevor would sometimes make comments about my clothes, my hair, suggesting I might want to polish my image now that I was dating someone from his world. But I was in love, or at least I thought I was. Maybe I was just in love with the idea of being loved by someone like him, someone who seemed so sure, so stable, so established. He proposed on the terrace of his family's country club with his whole family watching. The ring was enormous, 3 carats, emerald cut, platinum band. Everyone applauded. Constance's smile looked like it physically pained her. But Trevor kissed me and whispered that he couldn't wait to spend his life with me, and I said yes. We got married 4 months later. Small ceremony, though small for the Whitmores meant 200 people. I moved into the Whitmore estate, this sprawling mansion that had been in Trevor's family for 3 generations. 12 bedrooms, a tennis court, a pool house bigger than the apartment I grew up in. I felt like I was living in a movie. But movies end, don't they? Real life keeps going. Slowly, things changed. Trevor suggested I take a break from nursing. Just temporarily, he said, until we settled into married life. Then it was, why don't you quit? We don't need the money. His mother echoed the sentiment, no Whitmore wife works. It's unbecoming. I resisted at first, but Trevor was persistent. He made it sound like he just wanted to take care of me, like my working somehow meant he wasn't man enough to provide. So I quit. And with that job went my friends, my daily routine, my purpose. The mansion felt less like a home and more like a beautiful prison. Trevor was always working, traveling for his real estate development company. Constance would drop by unannounced to critique everything from how I dressed to how I arranged flowers. I started to feel myself shrinking, becoming smaller and quieter, trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me. Then I got pregnant. I thought maybe this would change things, bring us closer. make me feel like I belonged in this family. Trevor's reaction wasn't what I expected. He was distant, distracted. He started working even longer hours, taking trips that lasted weeks. When I'd call him excited about feeling the baby kick, he'd cut the conversation short. When I asked him to come to ultrasound appointments, he always had a meeting he couldn't miss. I gave birth to our daughter 3 days before everything fell apart. Luna. I named her Luna because even in my darkest moments during that pregnancy, I'd look at the moon and feel like maybe everything would be okay. Trevor wasn't at the hospital when she was born. He texted that he was closing a deal in Boston and couldn't get away. My mother held my hand instead. My father cut the umbilical cord. I came home from the hospital expecting Trevor to be there, expecting him to meet his daughter, to maybe finally show some emotion. Instead, I found my bags packed on the front porch. The locks had been changed. Security guards were standing at the door with their arms crossed. I stood there with my 3-day-old baby in my arms, wearing the same clothes I'd left the hospital in, trying to understand what was happening. Then Trevor appeared. He walked out of that house like he was heading to a business meeting, his face cold and blank. "You need to leave," he said. Just like that. No explanation, no emotion. I remember asking him if this was a joke, if he'd lost his mind. I reminded him we had a baby together, his baby. He looked at Luna like she was a stranger's child and said something I'll never forget. "I know what you did, Camilla. I know you trapped me. You saw a rich man and you decided to lock him down with a pregnancy. But I'm not stupid. That baby probably isn't even mine. And even if she is, I want nothing to do with either of you." I couldn't breathe. The world tilted. Constance appeared behind him on the steps, and I understood. She'd gotten in his head, poisoned him against me. She'd never wanted me in her family, and she'd found a way to get rid of me. "Trevor, please," I begged. I actually begged. "We can do a paternity test right now. You know Luna is yours. You know I never—" "Security will escort you off the property," he interrupted. "If you come back, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. My lawyers will be in touch about the divorce." That's when I saw her, standing in the window of what used to be our bedroom. A blonde woman in expensive clothes, watching the whole thing with a satisfied smile. Trevor had already replaced me. Probably had been seeing her for months. The security guards, men I'd said good morning to every day for 2 years, grabbed my bags and walked me to the gate. Photographers appeared out of nowhere, camera flashes in my face while I tried to shield Luna. Later, I'd find out Constance had tipped off the press. The story was already written. Gold-digging nurse exposed, kicked out of mansion, probably not even his baby. By that evening, my face was all over social media. The comments were vicious. People I'd never met calling me every name you can imagine, saying I got what I deserved, saying women like me always try to trap men like Trevor. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing until I turned it off. I sat on a bench at a bus stop 2 blocks from the mansion. Everything I owned was in one suitcase. I had $217 in my bank account. Trevor had already frozen our joint accounts. Luna was crying. I was crying. I had nowhere to go. My parents had moved to Florida after my father's retirement. My friends from the hospital had drifted away during my marriage. I was completely alone. That's when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. But something made me look at the screen. Unknown number. "Ms. Rodriguez?" A man's voice. Formal. Professional. "My name is Bernard Castellano. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Isabella Domingo. I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. It's urgent that we speak." I had no idea who Isabella Domingo was. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but my brain was so foggy from lack of sleep and heartbreak that I couldn't place it. "I think you have the wrong number," I said, my voice broken from crying. "Is this Camila Rodriguez, daughter of Ana Rodriguez, born February 14th, 1997? "Yes, but—" "Then I have the right number. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm very sorry for your loss. Your grandmother passed away 6 days ago." My grandmother. I felt something cold wash over me. "I don't have a grandmother. She died before I was born." "No, Ms. Rodriguez. Your maternal grandmother, Isabella Domingo, passed away last Tuesday, and you are the sole beneficiary of her estate. I need you to come to my office immediately. There are papers to sign, decisions to make. Your grandmother left you everything." I barely remember the cab ride to his office. Luna slept in my arms the whole way. Mr. Castellano's office was in one of those buildings downtown with marble floors and art that probably cost more than houses. He sat me down in a conference room and told me a story I could barely believe. My grandmother hadn't died before I was born. That's what my mother had told me, but it was a lie. The truth was, my mother had run away from home at 18 to marry my father. Isabella had disapproved, not because my father was a bad man, but because my mother was throwing away opportunities, running from responsibilities. They'd had a terrible fight. My mother cut off all contact, refused to reconcile even when Isabella tried to reach out, but Isabella never stopped watching over me. She'd hired investigators to keep track of my life. She knew when I graduated high school, when I became a nurse, when I married Trevor. She knew what kind of man he was long before I figured it out. Mr. Castellano showed me letters she'd written, dozens of them, addressed to me but never sent. Letters explaining why she'd kept her distance, why she'd waited to reveal herself. "She wanted you to learn your own lessons," Mr. Castellano said gently. "She wanted you to discover your own strength. She was going to contact you after your daughter was born. She wanted to meet her great-granddaughter, but her heart gave out before she could." Then he slid a folder across the table. "This is what she left you. Domingo Pharmaceuticals." My grandmother hadn't just been wealthy. She'd been a titan. She'd built a generic medication manufacturing empire from nothing. Started in a garage, mixing compounds, working 100-hour weeks. She'd supplied 40% of all generic drugs to hospitals across America. Manufacturing plants in 12 states. Research facilities developing affordable medications for diseases that pharmaceutical companies ignored because they weren't profitable enough. A charitable foundation that gave away millions in free medications to people who couldn't afford them. The numbers were staggering. $3.7 billion. That's what I'd inherited. $3.7 billion. I sat there in that conference room, holding my 3-day-old daughter, homeless and heartbroken, and I couldn't process it. Hours ago, I'd had nothing. Now I had everything. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. An entire company. A legacy. "There's something else," Mr. Castellano said. He looked almost amused. "Your grandmother's company has several long-term contracts with medical real estate developers. One of them is Whitmore Properties. They lease medical office buildings from Domingo Pharmaceuticals. The contract is worth $18 million annually, and it's up for renewal next month." I looked up at him. "Trevor's company?" "Trevor's family company, yes. According to our financial analysts, Whitmore Properties is struggling. Bad investments over the past few years. That contract with your grandmother's company? It's the only thing keeping them afloat. Without it, they'll likely file for bankruptcy within 6 months." For the first time in days, I smiled. The next week was a blur. Mr. Castellano arranged everything. A penthouse suite in the city's best hotel, a team of nannies and assistants, security, lawyers, financial advisors, board meetings where men twice my age called me Ms. Domingo with respect in their voices. I was terrified and overwhelmed and determined not to let my grandmother down. I threw myself into learning the business. Every night after Luna fell asleep, I'd read reports, study contracts, understand the industry my grandmother had dominated. I met with the senior staff who'd worked with her for decades. They told me stories about her, how tough she was, how fair, how she never forgot where she came from, how she'd built her empire on the principle that medicine should heal people, not bankrupt them. I decided to honor that, to expand her vision. I approved funding for new research into affordable insulin alternatives. I increased the charitable foundation's budget. I visited the manufacturing plants and shook hands with every worker I could. I wanted to be worthy of what she'd left me. But I'll be honest, there was something else driving me too. Anger. Hurt. The need to show Trevor exactly what he'd thrown away. The meeting happened on a cold morning in November. Trevor had requested an urgent meeting with Domingo Pharmaceuticals to discuss the contract renewal. He didn't know I owned the company. The lawyers had kept my name out of all the paperwork. As far as Trevor knew, he was meeting with some corporate representatives to negotiate terms. I walked into that boardroom in a black suit that cost more than Trevor's car, hair pulled back, no jewelry except my grandmother's wedding ring that Mr. Castellano had given me. Luna was with her nanny in my office down the hall. I'd made sure to pump before the meeting so I could focus. Trevor was already seated with his lawyers and his mother. Constance wore pearls and that same disgusted expression she'd always reserved for me. Trevor looked stressed, older. There were dark circles under his eyes. When I walked in, the room went silent. Trevor's face went white. Constance actually gasped. "Hello, Trevor," I said calmly, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Thank you for coming. I believe we have a contract to discuss." Trevor stammered. Actually stammered. "Camilla? What are you... You can't be... I'm the majority owner and CEO of Domingo Pharmaceuticals," I said. "My grandmother left me her entire estate, this company, everything, which means I'm the person who decides whether or not to renew your contract." Constance found her voice. "This is absurd. You're a nurse. You don't know anything about running a company." "I was a nurse," I corrected. "Now I'm a billionaire. And I know enough to see that Whitmore Properties owes my company $18 million annually for a contract that's about to expire. I also know your company is in financial trouble. Bad investments, mismanagement. Without our contract, you'll be bankrupt by spring." Trevor's lawyer tried to interject, but I held up my hand. "Here are my terms," I said. "You will issue a public apology for the lies you spread about me. You will take a paternity test, administered by a lab of my choosing, and when it proves that Luna is your daughter, you will acknowledge her publicly and set up a trust fund in her name. You will agree to a divorce settlement that gives me full custody with supervised visitation rights if you want them. And you will never contact me directly again unless it's through our lawyers regarding Luna." "And if I refuse?" Trevor asked, his voice tight. "Then I terminate the contract effective immediately. Your company goes under. You lose everything, including the house your family has owned for 3 generations, since I'm sure the bank will come for it when you default on loans." The room was silent. Constance looked like she might have a heart attack. Trevor looked at his lawyers, but they had nothing to say. I had all the power now. Every single card. "You have 48 hours to decide," I said, standing up. "My secretary will show you out." I walked out of that boardroom with my head high. My hands were shaking, but they couldn't see that. All they saw was the woman who'd just taken back her power. Trevor took the deal. He held a press conference 2 days later, admitting he'd lied about me, that he'd treated me terribly, that he'd let his mother poison his mind. The paternity test proved what I'd known all along. Luna was his daughter. He set up the trust fund, signed the divorce papers without contest. The contract renewal went through at double the original price. The internet that had crucified me suddenly decided I was a hero. Articles about my grandmother's legacy, about my journey from nurse to CEO. Forbes called me for an interview. People called me an inspiration. It was overwhelming and strange, and sometimes I still felt like that heartbroken woman sitting at a bus stop with nowhere to go. But I had Luna. I had a purpose. I had my grandmother's legacy to honor. That was 6 months ago. Today, I run a $3.7 billion company. I've expanded the charitable foundation to offer free prenatal care and medications to low-income mothers. I bought my own house, not a mansion, just a comfortable home with a yard for Luna. My parents moved back from Florida. My mother holds Luna while I take video calls with board members. Trevor pays his child support and sees Luna once a month under supervision. He looks sad every time. Empty. He married that blonde woman from the window, but I heard they're already separated. Constance doesn't come to the visits. I think seeing me successful physically pains her. I don't hate Trevor anymore. I don't feel much of anything for him, actually. He was a chapter in my life that taught me valuable lessons about knowing my worth, about not shrinking myself to fit into spaces that weren't meant for me. Sometimes late at night, when Luna is sleeping and the house is quiet, I think about my grandmother. I wish I'd known her. I wish I could thank her. She built an empire so that her granddaughter would never be powerless. She gave me more than money. She gave me proof that I came from strength, from resilience, from a woman who refused to be small. Last week, I cut the ribbon on a new clinic in Brooklyn. Free maternal health care and medications for anyone who needs them. I named it the Isabella Domingo Center. In my speech, I said that some people marry into money, but I married into misery, and that I inherited something better than billions. I inherited the strength of the woman who built an empire so her granddaughter would never be powerless again. Luna was there in her stroller, smiling at the cameras. My daughter will grow up knowing her great-grandmother's story, knowing that women in our family don't beg for scraps. We build empires, and that's how you go from homeless with a newborn to running a billion-dollar empire. If this story reminded you that your value isn't defined by who stays or leaves, smash that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you would have said to Trevor in that boardroom. And subscribe, because I've got more stories about underdogs who became top dogs. Remember, never let anyone make you feel small. You might just be standing on top of an empire you